Oop, just one second here. I have to turn up my volume. I'm not sure if anyone is even hearing me. Sorry about that. I'm definitely louder now. Okay. If anyone can't hear me well, just put in the chat room if you can't hear me, okay? But you should be hearing me fine. Okay. Well, why should we care about politics? Well, I think we probably know that if you haven't noticed, that human experience shows that politics, it definitely impacts billions of people. I mean, there's no doubt about it. If you go to different countries, you live in Venezuela, you live in Russia, you live in China, whether you live in the United States, I mean, bad political policies impact a lot of people, and good political policies impact a lot of people, as we know, billions of people. So, bad political choices sometimes leads to dictatorship, starvation, and deaths for millions of people, and it could be the opposite, right? Hopefully, the goal is that countries endorse good or try to abide by good political decisions that nurture freedom, life, justice, and peace. That's the goal. Of course, it doesn't always happen. But, we can't say that politics just doesn't matter. Like, well, I'm a Christian, I don't care, I'm saved, I'm going to heaven, and that's all that matters. That's just not the case, okay? So I'll talk more about. That it is true, by the way, what I just said, but you still need to realize there's more to it than that, okay? Well, it is true that Christianity has struggled for a long time to find a settled, formal political philosophy. It definitely has struggled. It still struggles. And there's been books written on it, but there's a lot of disagreement among Christian political scientists, Christian sociologists, Christian scholars. Just, there's still not really complete agreement on what is a settled formal political philosophy for Christians. Okay, you can take a class in like political philosophy in college, as you probably know. Maybe some of you have. And there's been some books, written about these things, to help Christians. I recommend any of these books. Good starting points. But certainly a lot more. There's many more books to read. I'm just talking about if you're just starting out. That Politics for Christians is a good one by Francis Beckwith up in the corner, and Hunter Baker's book's good. They're all good, but if you want to just start kind of diving in a little more, Wayne Grudem's book, he's a theologian. It's a pretty good book. It's pretty extensive, but that's a theologian's take on politics. He's not a political scientist or anything. Of course, theologians try to write about everything, so he's just another one that's done that. But anyway, it's still got some good material on it. Okay, so why are we so polarized? As as far as just in general, why are we so polarized more than we ever have been over politics? Well, I think we all know the internet's a huge problem. There's so much social media 24 hours a day. When I was growing up, I came home from school. I either went and did something for a couple hours or did my homework, and then I was home by 6:00, 6:30. I come home and eat dinner with my family, and my dad would then watch the news. And the news is only on for like an hour. That was it, like 6 to 7 p.m., right? But now it's on 24 hours a day, right? There's now 24 hours news networks, and there's the internet. There's hundreds and hundreds of news sites, websites, YouTube, everything. So people are just receiving this stuff all the time, and it's too much information to absorb, and it creates a lot of anxiety. It creates a lot of polarization. It creates a lot of tribalism. We're very tribal creatures. We tend to hang out with people who agree with us. We don't want to have people challenge us, and come against our views. So a lot of times we stay in our echo chambers, right, with people that agree with us. Everyone's guilty of that. I'm guilty too. We've all done it. But definitely we've gravitated a lot more towards ideological things. I mean, sometimes it's because the culture's broken in so many areas, the family's broken, and these things we used to cling to kind of bring us together, these strong national ties we have, are these things that brought us together, whether it be communal activities, things in community or school or family issues or church. These things are always challenged today. They're much more challenged than they used to be. There's a lot of breakdown in those institutions. And so now people are very individualistic. Um, they might gravitate towards a group, but they're going to gravitate towards politics a lot, because I think politics is all that matters. It's all they have sometimes. They think that's the answer to everything. But anyway, so the internet's a huge problem, why there's so much polarization. And there's no doubt that Christians are having a hard time thinking and talking about politics, because almost everyone is having a hard time thinking and talking about politics. It's not just Christians, it's everybody. Okay? We're not alone. And I think we know, as I say, number two, that some Christians and churches are really political, or probably too political, as far as they just eat, drink, and sleep electoral politics. It's all they think and talk about. And remember that, both parties today, I know maybe you don't agree with the two-party system, that's another topic, but, Democrats and Republicans, we agreed on a lot of things in 1960, but now we don't agree on much of anything, right, in 2022. So times have changed, and both parties are very polarized, and people are very polarized, sadly. So it's a different day today. Now, just remember that the Bible doesn't offer a detailed blueprint for political life today. I think we probably know that, but it offers like a normative framework, okay? Nothing in the Bible talks explicitly about the pros and cons of a market economy or multinational corporation, or the impact of over 7 billion people in the natural environment, or does it talk about capitalism or socialism? It doesn't address those issues. So, trying to go to the Bible as a guidebook for politics is very hard. Okay, it's very hard. And I think a lot of Christians try to do that because we try to proof text, meaning we take passages out of context, right? And then we put it up there like, this agrees with my political views, or Jesus would endorse that or not endorse this, and therefore I've got the right position. So what I mean by that is, if you try to proof text, let me give you an example. So let's say you are thinking about immigration, and you go to Exodus 23:9 out of context. It says, you shall not oppress, as God's writing to Israel, you shall not oppress a sojourner, you shall know the heart of a sojourner, for you are sojourners in the land of Egypt. So some people have taken that one verse and applied it to the entire immigration debate, saying just open the borders, let them in. I mean, they were sojourners there, and these are people that are sojourners now, let them in. How incredibly simplistic and how incredibly stupid, may I say that is, and how naive, by the way. You can't take Bible verses and just try to make a universal application in today's political climate, okay? There's way more things involved here, way more complex. There's so many complexities to immigration and complexities to other political topics. So to try to just use one verse and then apply it to an entire position politically is really dangerous, in my opinion. So anyway, and people do it all the time, by the way, all the time. We did it with COVID. Love your neighbor as yourself. Remember that one? You'll love your neighbor as yourself if you get vaccinated. You're not loving your neighbor as yourself if you don't do this. You're not loving your neighbor if you don't mask up. I could go on and on. So that was really sad to see that. And it's just amazing how Christians will just butcher the Bible to prescribe what they want for other Christians. And also, there's no doubt that I think we all know or in the Bible, Jesus doesn't endorse a political party. He doesn't, there's none of that. He's walking around and they're thinking, are you Democrat or Republican? That doesn't exist then, right? So there's been all kinds of books trying to fit Jesus into a political system. They don't work. And people keep doing it and keep trying to do it, but it doesn't work. So just remember that Jesus obviously didn't really endorse either party, and those didn't exist at his time. Now, there's been different approaches for, how Christians approach politics. There's of course one view that says, do evangelism, don't do politics, stay out of politics, preach the gospel, right? Because obviously that's what saves people, that's what gets them to heaven. This world is kind of fading anyway, and one day Jesus is going to come back, and this world's just going to be disintegrated one day anyway. They think the Bible teaches God's just going to like incinerate this world. It's going to be like totally annihilated. And therefore, they just think the goal is just to preach the gospel. And so, we want to share the good news because we want to get people's souls saved. Heaven is the ultimate destination, and earth is a bad place, right? Or at least a worse place. That's kind of a very Gnostic view. The Gnostics viewed everything material is evil, like the body's evil, material things are evil. And what's really spiritual is outside the physical realm. It is true that, we want people to believe. Yes, we want them to have a relationship with God. We want to preach the gospel. And of course, heaven is not the final pit stop. It's halfway there, right? Because the final destination is in your resurrection body back on earth, right? One day you'll be back in the new heavens, new earth. So heaven's just temporary. But people, may take that view. I just have kind of like the heaven center view and the stay out of politics view. I'm just going to preach the gospel. And then, the criticisms are, of course, as I said, do evangelism, not politics, means that only the spiritual or non-material things matter to God. And he's not really interested in the actual circumstances of people's life in this world. That's kind of, like I said, a very Gnostic or Platonic view. If that was the case, then God could just take us all away. I mean, if he doesn't care about this earth, why does he even leave us here, right? Why does he have us here trying to be productive Christians in this world? And then, of course, some people believe we're going to be raptured. So who cares about this place? We're going to be taken out of here. They believe in the rapture. Not all Christians believe in a rapture. But the point is that some people think, who cares about politics? Jesus is going to rapture us out of here anyway. Some people believe that. I'm not saying everybody does. But, sometimes we assume that the Bible interpreters, the ones who are, sometimes when we interpret the Bible, we bring these false dichotomies to the Bible. We try to pit the religious versus secular. We try to pit the supernatural versus natural, the spiritual versus physical, the material versus immaterial. And the Bible doesn't necessarily do that. In the Bible, everything is spiritual, all realms of life. Your job's a spiritual activity. You playing sports is a spiritual activity. You exercise is spiritual activity. Eating food's a spiritual activity. Everything you do, it's not just going to church an hour a week. That is not just, that's the spiritual thing. The rest of it's non-spiritual. That's not what the Bible teaches. Just like God cares about your body, right? That's why we keep telling transgender people your body matters. It's not just your gender, your body, your biological sex and your gender stay together. They're like one package, okay? We don't split those apart. The problem is, part of the problem is that I think that as Christians, we struggle with politics because we're living in a tension. What I mean by that, we live in a tension point where Jesus came, he started the kingdom of God, he died and rose from the dead, he left, went back to be with God, and then he's coming back one day, he's going to set up his physical kingdom on earth, and we live in this tension point between those 2 points, in the already but not yet. And so what happens is we live as eschatological people. What I mean by that is we're living in the end times. The end times have been going on since Jesus came. The last days started when Jesus came, okay? They thought they're living in the last days at the time of Jesus. They thought Jesus was coming back then. For the last 2,000 years, we thought he's coming back at some time. He hasn't. And we're still in the last days, okay? But we live in the already but not yet phase. The kingdom's been inaugurated, but it's not completed. So we kind of live in this tension point. We don't know what to do because it's like, yeah, I got to live in this world. I've got politics, all this bad, corrupt politics stuff, and I've got to vote and be responsible. But yet, yeah, Jesus is coming back. He's going to restore his kingdom. And I'm kind of, how much do I get involved? How much do I care? Or should I care at all? Should I care too much? Should I care too little? And so we kind of live in that tension point, right? And that's hard, and I understand that. Because I think that's reality. We live as eschatological people. At least that's what we're called to do. We're called to live as eschatological people. That's a biblical thing. Paul says that we're seated in heavenly places, right? as if we're seated, it's like we're sitting, reigning and ruling with Jesus right now at the right hand of God. And he says in Ephesians that, yeah, we're seated in heavenly places. That's our position in Christ, right? And then he says in Philippians, even though we live on earth, our citizenship is in heaven. And so, we live in this tension point, between living in this physical world where all we can see is all we do. We have our five senses, and we have physical needs, we have real needs around us, material needs, and we have to live in this world. But yet we know something transcends us, and we know this, we're not going to be here forever. But for now we live here, and it's like, well, how much should I get involved? I mean, Jesus is coming back, right? Well, we've been saying that for 2,000 years. He's still not here. But, do I punt out of politics? Do I get involved? Do I care? Do I not care? So that's the tension we live in. But, there's no doubt that we want to teach our people, Christians want to know how to do good works, right? We want to be engaged in good works in hospitals and in schools and businesses and neighborhoods. We're supposed to be doing good works, not to earn our salvation, just we're called to do good works, right? So obviously we'd be called to do good works in government, right? I mean, some of us are called to government. I'm not in government. Maybe some of you are, maybe some of you have been in government. But the point is that we want to have influence in every area of society. And, we shouldn't exclude influence of good works in government, right? Because government influences a lot of people. A lot of people get impacted by what happens in government. And, if we're going to say, if you're going to proof text and say, well, we should love your neighbors yourself, then if you're going to do that, then I think we should probably be seeking the good in every aspect of society, right? Including to bring about good government and good laws. So when you vote tomorrow, for those of you that are voting live in the United States or elsewhere, when you vote, you're involved in the process of things that will happen that will bring about the good of the people, right, around you, to impact your neighbor, right? Those laws, those things that get passed and those people get put in office have an impact on your fellow man, of course, right? It's not just about you. You have to think about the bigger picture, right? It's about how those things impact the society around them, people, right? People who God are made in the image of God. Now, another view, of course, for some Christians is it's all politics and not much evangelism. Some Christians think that we should just try to change the laws and the culture and not emphasize much personal evangelism. And this kind of was what the social gospel movement was about in the late 19th and earliest 20th century. So they just tried to focus more on social reform, but little focus on personal evangelism, right? We could start all these social programs that would fix everything, but we're not going to focus so much on personal evangelism. So that's been debated a lot, of course. We don't need to pit those against each other, but we certainly don't want to necessarily say if we pass every social program that's going to fix everything. It doesn't, and it hasn't fixed everything, as we know. So we're definitely called to preach the gospel, and that's what, of course, changes the human heart. And we, have to be involved in both. Just want to have a few different, just expand a little bit on Christians' views of politics. Another view of Christianity against politics, for Christians that are against politics. Usually most Christians that take this approach, they'll go ahead and endorse both parties or one party. I mean, they'll say two parties are fine, and they believe politics is important and you should vote, but they see politics really as really just very worldly and very idolatrous, which it can be, of course, right? But they're just like, they tolerate it, you know what I mean? But they're not really engaged in it very much. I mean, it's kind of like, yeah, I got to vote, and I certainly need to, realize that that's my duty. But other than that, that's about it. They don't spend a lot of time trying to, these people don't spend a lot of time trying to figure out different political views. They don't try to figure out how to figure out different political philosophies. They don't get that deep into it, right? Trying to figure out how to really engage a political system is a very simple view. And then there's the Christianity as politics view, In this approach, the message of Christianity and the task of the individual Christian is seen as incredibly, irreducibly political. They go hand in hand. The Christianity is political. And this, plays over to some of the civil religion that's always in our country. People that, have a great national pride in their country. They think that Christianity should be blended in with American history, democratic sensibilities, national patriotism, and then Orthodox Christianity. They kind of all go together, which isn't a terrible thing, but also can be a little tricky sometimes because people get a little too nationalistic with that. Everybody has a healthy nationalism. You should honor your country, and obviously that's just part of being an American person. I mean, whether you're Swiss, German, you have some sort of national honor for your country, but I mean, I'm just saying that sometimes it gets incredibly mixed in. A lot of Christianity nationalism get mixed in with each other in the bad way, right? So that can get a little tricky too. And then there's another view, Christianity, where it's under politics, and this means that Christians see Christian ideas and Christian communities as essential, healthy political order. And then Christianity is like a foundational, indispensable human pursuit of the good, the true, and the beautiful. But the problem with this is sometimes the church, in what it's called to do and its mission, becomes a little more secondary, and the nation or the state becomes more primary. And so what happens is sometimes Christians get a little more zealous, overly zealous for the political liberty, social justice, or national greatness. A little too focused on nationalism again, not as much focus on Jesus for the gospel and the gospel. They get a little off base there. So these are all things Christians wrestle with. As I said, I don't think it's easy to figure this out. I would agree with Kevin DeYoung and what he says here. His quote, I think, is spot on. He's a pastor. He says, we need an approach to politics that is engaged but not idolatrous, transcendent but not relativizing, culture shaping but also constrained, supportive of a border Christianity infused tradition while also insisting that Christ is our first love and not that tradition. I think that's pretty spot on. I think that's pretty balanced there. So anyway, now there's a guy that wrote a book called Endangered Gospel called John Nugent. I have this book, Endangered Gospel, How Fixing the World is Killing the Church. And what he means by that is when he says that, sometimes people, including Christians, we get so involved in trying to fix everything in this world. We almost try to bring like a utopia here. Of course, secularists, that believe that science is all there is and this world is all there is, of course, they kind of try to do that. They're trying to bring a utopia, right? They want to make this world, they can fix everything in this world through science and other social means, but maybe through politics, of course, right? And so, we can't make this world into a utopia, all right? Politics can't fix every single problem in this country or world, never has been able to, as we know. And a lot of times, politics tries to do things and they get broken even more, right? It just gets worse. So we need to have a realistic view of what we can accomplish. Yeah, we should try to help and bring change and try to do things, but obviously we need to understand the limitations of what can get done. Okay, as long as you're dealing with fallen humans and broken vessels and corruption and sin, then it's always going to be a challenge, right? And remember what Michael Brown says here in his book, The Political Seduction of the Church, book that came out the last 6 months. Michael writes a book about every 3 months. The guy doesn't sleep. I think I told you about that. He never sleeps. From my own experience in actually being with him and dropping him off at hotels, he doesn't go to bed. But anyway, he says here, we must never forget that the political arm of our work will always be fleshly. It will always be a mixture of believers and non-believers. We'll always be corrupted by power and personal ambition and greed. That's why we must never put our full trust in political system or a party or a candidate. Politics has its place, but is not the kingdom of God. To the extent we get in bed with it, we are making a deal with the devil. And he's right. So, good word there. Now, another thing that comes to the surface of politics is a lot of Christians get accused of these things, and I think that I've seen non-Christians get scared of these things, and yeah, these terms come up sometimes. Like I'll be on campus doing outreach, and you talk to some students, they think Christians are out to bring a Christian theocracy or dominionism or something. This comes up sometimes in conversations. Some of these words include theonomy or Christian reconstructionism or dominion theology, and that is where some Christians believe we just need to have dominion over everything, over all the earth, physically, spiritually, and politically, and that God only wants Christians in office. We have to get all Christians in office in order to usher in the return of Jesus. Um, and also the laws in the Old Testament are applicable to today, that we need to pass laws and government based on those laws. Now, not everybody believes this. Not every Christian holds it. There's some Christians out there that hold to this, but it's certainly not the majority, I think. But most secularists fear a theocracy. A theocracy, of course, it's a government that's led by God, by people who claim to be spokespersons for God, where the church and the state are unified as one. Very similar to what Islamic countries are like, where you have Islam and the government hand in hand with each other, right? And that's not good. And most Christians I talk to don't want a theocracy. I mean, I personally don't. Maybe you do, but I kind of like the way the government was set up to begin with, where our founders based it on a kind of what it's called a Jefferson view. It's like more of a deistic view, like God's there, but they don't really say it's predominantly Christian, the Christian God or the biblical God, right? It's a creator. They appeal to a creator, but they don't specifically say it's this God or that God, right? I mean, you could infer it's a biblical God, but the point is our government wasn't started based on a theocracy, okay? And it probably won't ever be a theocracy, and I don't think most of us want a theocracy, but some people do. And many secularists are afraid of that, of course. And then, we run into problems sometimes of just some pitfalls, is that we tend to think that maybe we need someone in office who embraces Jesus to accomplish what God wants. And there's nothing in the Bible, that ever said that people have to be believers before they can be used by God to advance his purposes. Sure, it's nice if they are, but we know in the Bible that God uses a lot of people to accomplish his purposes that are not believers, right? Pharaoh, king of Egypt, to raise Joseph to a position of authority over the whole country so he could save his people from famine. We see that in Genesis 41. We see Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, used to protect Daniel and raise up Daniel's Jewish friends to positions of high authority in Babylon. Cyrus, of course, used to restore the Jewish exiles. No, I'm not going to get in I don't want to get the saying if our last president was like a Cyrus. I'm not going to go down that road. I don't talk about that. Just head that off right now. Or God uses, he used the peace enforced by the secular Roman Empire to enable the first missionaries to travel freely and spread the gospel with the Mediterranean world. Point is that God obviously uses people who are non-Christians to accomplish his purposes. We see it all throughout the Bible. It is true, though, I would agree that something shifted in our culture. I mean, when I grew up as a young kid, I mean, I'm younger than some of you, probably older than some of you on this call, but I kind of looked up to the president as like a great role model. He was like this beacon of kind of like integrity and morality and just this, not perfect, but you had this respect, you know what I mean? Of course, we know that that's shifted. Kids were taught in school, of course, the moral conduct of certain presidents. And, we know that when a president sets a bad example or something happens, such as some past presidents, we know that it just, it leads to profound disappointment in a lot of the American people. I mean, we certainly view them as sometimes they view them as need to be the beacon of perfection. Of course, they're not. They're just as fallen as anybody else. They're sinful men. But the point is that it's kind of shifted today. I don't think probably we have the respect for the presidential office we used to. That's kind of faded away from what I can see. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's what I see. But I'm sure some of you would agree. Should you vote, though? What about politics and voting? Well, one thing you should realize, you have the freedom to vote, which is a privilege. Some people can't vote. It shapes certainly what happens in all important areas of politics, right? If we have, if Jesus is our Lord and our vote has the potential to encourage political decisions that promote the well-being of our neighbors, then the obligation to vote is follows from that necessity, right? And we have freedoms because and certainly we need to remember, as we hopefully know, that we have freedoms because other people lay down our lives for our freedoms. Those didn't come easy, the freedoms we have. Some people don't know that. They don't know history, and they just trash everything about, our country. But they forget that, their freedoms were bought with a price, right? So we have the freedom to vote, and it's a privilege. But, the main priority of civil government is to administer the justice system and to protect our borders, right? There's not much in the purpose of civil government, at least there never really was, for the first priority of civil government is to feed and clothe and shelter people. Not that I'm saying people shouldn't get food and clothing and shelter. I'm not against that. I'm saying that's not never was like the main purpose of civil government. If you're called to protect the security of the people, and that's the main purpose of government, then I don't know if you know this, and I don't want to get overly political, but we now have open borders, okay? And 3 million people have come in through the borders illegally. And maybe some of them are getting vetted now, but most of them are being told that the border's wide open, they can just come. So by the time, over the next 2 years, we should probably have about 6 million, I think, going into different cities who don't have jobs, don't have any structure. I don't know, they're not stable. And so we're just absorbing all these people now. Just for the record, I don't want to make this whole call about immigration. I'm all for immigrants coming in, but they need to come in legally. That's my view. They have to come in legally. And so I'm really concerned about this. This is something that really concerns me. But that's a voting issue, and that's why you get to vote, right? You have the privilege of voting because your last vote you voted 2 years ago is impacting this situation. This has happened since your last vote 2 years ago, right? It's what this is kicked up to another notch, okay? But as I said, so one of the main purposes of civil government is to protect our God-given rights. And where do our God-given rights come from? You read about the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they're endowed by the Creator with certain unalienable rights, and among those are life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. So if those are where our rights come from, that means the government can only recognize God-given rights. Okay, so if there's no Creator, there's no unalienable rights. Okay, unalienable rights. Or if rights come from government, then government can take them away legally, ethically, morally, and justly. Just take them away. Okay, but I'm still running into a lot of people out there to think their rights come from government. If government gives them these rights, government has to give it to them. Well, no. Once again, government only recognizes God-given rights. That's all it can do. Okay. So when Stevie Nicks, the great Fleetwood Mac singer, who I have to admit, I love her voice, and I've seen Fleetwood Mac in concert, and I've listened to a lot of their music. Don't so much anymore, but she said this year about look at her comment here, how confused she is. So she says here, by the way, she did have an abortion herself, but she says, "Dear friends, fans, women of America from 18 to 100 years old, I'm sending you out a formal poem that I wrote not very long ago and the next day made into a song. Recording a song out here on the road is not an easy task, so while I'm doing that, I decided that you should have the words. At 74 years old, I can honestly say I'm worried about every one of you. Worried about healthcare and just in general worried about your God-given rights. You must gather together now. You must register to vote as soon as you can. For many of you, the deadline is tomorrow, October 11th, and you must vote. The disintegration of Roe versus Wade will change your life in an unfathomable way. You will not have control over what your beautiful dreams want for you. Your lives will be in the hands of government officials who do not know you and cannot possibly know what your future should be. You are the masters of your own ship. I watched what happened to women from 1966, I was 18, to 1973. I was 25 and 2 years away from joining Fleetwood Mac. Believe me when I tell you, you don't want that world to come back. So please vote. And everyone ask them to join you. Read the words to my son. I wrote it for you. I love you." So here Stevie Nicks is saying she's worried about our God-given rights. She's actually admitting this. They come from God, not government, which she's on track there. But then she thinks your God-given rights are that you should have total freedom to abort kids. So God apparently is giving you that right. That's what she's kind of assuming here. They're under attack, your God-given rights. So she is really confused. But anyway, then we have people fighting for transgender rights, obviously. It just goes on and on. People want the rights, don't even want to dare trample upon the rights of people to cut off their breasts and genitals and switch over to a different biological sex or attempt to. Two people in our current administration on the bottom right are both transgenders. You should see them. They're both on the bottom corner there. But the point is that people really are big on this, fighting for the rights for people to do that. Well, where do those rights come from? Are those God-given rights? Because if you're borrowing them from God, God does not endorse changing your biological sex. He doesn't endorse that, okay? So that's another state of area of confusion as well. And we have, certain people out there that basically are obsessed with transgender rights, and they're making it their life mission. Okay, so this just like goes against reality for me. If you're going to deny fundamental reality and then fight for adjusting to reality what you want, and you want to make that your purpose in life to fight for the rights for people to do that, then obviously I can't endorse any party that pushes that. I can't get behind it. I'm sorry. So I'll just go ahead and say that. Okay, so it comes to government and lawmaking. Virtually every political party decision in any significance is grounded in fundamental beliefs about morality and the nature of persons. Oh, by the way, I don't, obviously, anyone that has a different view on that, you're welcome to have that. I don't want to divide with you over it. I'm just stating my own conviction. Anyway, so we learn of the divine law through God's special revelation. We learn natural law through human reason. Now, our moral laws that get passed, remember that every law that goes through legislation, that gets on a bill to go through Congress, is taking a moral position. So when someone says to you, you can't legislate morality, you can't legislate religious morality, that's so wrong. All laws legislate a moral position, okay, no matter what they are. If you want secular morality, abortion is a moral position. Pro-life is a moral position. Transgender rights is a moral position. Immigration policy is a moral position. Everything is a moral position. Every law legislates a moral position, okay? So don't let anyone tell you, oh, you have to keep religion out of that. You keep religion out. Okay, so you want us to just legislate all laws that are completely secular then? Is that what you're saying? Remember that there were positive things that happened with government passing legislation. You had the American abolitionist movement in the mid-1830s. Those are people who certainly were devout Christians. American civil rights movement resulted in the outlawing of racial segregation. Demonstration was led by, of course, Martin Luther King, who is, as we know, a Christian pastor. Government should pass laws for the good of society and what's best for future generations, right? So anytime a law is going through, you have to think, is that good for future generations? It's not just about me and my personal happiness. Me. It's about future generations, right? The foundation of any good government culture society depends on moral commitments. As I said, every law legislates a moral position. And it doesn't make any sense to say religion and lawmaking are separate issues. So keep faith out of legislating morality. Makes no sense, because you can't legislate morality actually means you shouldn't make laws based on your morality, but on mine instead, right? As I just said. William Wilberforce, he made a movie called Amazing Grace off his life. He worked in Parliament to no end to abolish, to pass the Abolition Act, freeing 700,000 slaves. He had to do that through governmental means, right? His Christian convictions, his newfound Christian faith, that he was converted, he worked tirelessly to have that Abolition Act passed, okay? There's been other people, that have used government in a positive way. You had people have outlawed infanticide, child abandonment, abortion in the Roman Empire. People have outlawed the battles to death, which thousands of gladiators have died. They've outlawed cruel punishment, the branding the faces of criminals, in 315, instituting prison reforms such as segregating male and female prisoners in 361, the stopping practice of human sacrifice among the Irish, the Prussians, the Lithuanians, as well as among other nations, outlawing pedophilia, the granting of property rights under protections of women, banning polygamy, prohibiting the burning alive of widows in India in 1829, outlawing the painful and crippling practice of binding your women's feet in China in 1912, persuading government officials to begin a system of public schools in Germany in the 16th century. So the list goes on. A lot of these things were talked about in the book, How Christianity Changed the World. So, there's been positive things that have happened when people got involved with government. It's not all negative, okay? And God can use it in a positive way. Now, I want to emphasize something. Laws obviously don't always change the human heart. Laws are deterrents, right? They don't change the human heart. If you ban abortion legally all across the country and make it so no women can get access to abortion except for emergencies such as ectopic pregnancy or whatever, it's not necessarily going to change people's heart about abortion, right? It's a deterrent. Laws are deterrents, okay? So they still need the gospel, of course. There's still, laws aren't the only answer. I'm not saying that. But we know that, when Christians celebrated the redefinition of marriage, what was it, 5 or 6 years back, 7 years back, really, and I know Christians personally that did that, by the way, they were endorsing something that went against natural law and revealed law. You don't need the Bible to know that same-sex marriage is not just doesn't match natural law. It doesn't line up with natural law, which is based in just the natural world. You don't need the Bible to tell you that. But the point is that basically Christians were sometimes endorsing that. And that was pretty interesting when that happened. Of course, when you vote, we know that we try to find a candidate that is, or political candidates, I should say plural, that hopefully matches our values. And the reality of it is neither party completely matches our values. They never do. They both have problems. They're both corrupt. They both have fallen people in both parties, right? You just have to remember that if something's passed legally, sometimes people then they think that is morally right. For example, I know when same-sex marriage got passed as a law of the land, I had some people tell me, well, it must be right now because it's legalized. It's a law of the land, they would say. Or just think when abortion got passed, or back, Roe versus Wade. People, it's okay. It's morally right because it's a law of the land. No, not just because something passes in Congress or the Supreme Court or in Congress does not make it morally right necessarily or morally wrong. Okay, so you have to be discerning about that, obviously. As I said, laws are only deterrents. They don't change the human heart. And it's true that even if we pass certain laws prohibiting certain behaviors, obviously people may still try to commit those certain acts, those specific acts, right? In merely passing good laws and having good government never enough to change a society, because we know that Israel had good laws from God. We know those laws that Israel got did not keep them from going astray and violating the covenant. We know they broke those laws several times and it brought judgment on themselves, right? So just remember that winning elections isn't enough to change a nation. I know we all know that, right? Renewal to a nation and revival doesn't happen through necessarily a political election. I hope we all know that. And just remember that if God cares both about the family, the poor, sanctity of human life, racial justice, and creation, then should we not care about all these issues? And just my experience is that it's not so much both parties don't care about these issues. A lot of them talk about the same issues. It's the problem is they don't agree on the approach and how to fix these issues. They just simply don't agree. But it's not that they don't care about these issues, whatever it be for the wrong motives. I'm just saying that it's just interesting. I've noticed over the years, they'll bring up the same things. They just don't agree how to solve the problem. Okay. Religious freedom matters. We know that some people say, well, I don't really care about government religious freedom. I'm not relying on government to give me my religious freedom. Well, there's some truth to that, but just remember that North Korea, which is totally anti-Christian, tried to stop the halt of God's word being spread. They persecuted thousands of Christians there, right? And many Koreans are born there that never hear the gospel. North Korea sends out zero missionaries because they're just politically, they're anti-Christian. They don't allow religious freedom or anything. And so that impacts the gospel there, impacts the outgoing message of the gospel. South Korea is the opposite. Okay. Same things in China, same things in other countries. So government impacts religious freedom, whether you like it or not. I'm not saying we're going to have to be able to rely completely on government religious freedom, but just remember it does play a role. But why did God institute government? Well, he instituted it for the good of all people. Every rule and authority exists has been established by God. Human government is a derived authority, as Paul talks about. Those in authority are described as servants of God and ministers of God. Those who reject governmental authority reject God's authority. And civil governments are supposed to act as God's agents of justice. Okay, they're a means of justice, right? So we are called to be subject to government, obey its laws. I understand there's sometimes where we will have to go against government if they, violate our religious convictions and conscience. That's just the way it is, and sometimes we're going to have have civil disobedience. That has happened. We're called to pray for our civil leaders. Obviously, we're called to pay taxes, called to respect and honor governmental leaders. That's not happening a lot today, but we're supposed to do that. And obviously today we have a problem with political idolatry. I've talked about this before. And as Tim Keller says, you can know where you're caught up in political idolatry when, as he says here, he says, one of the signs that an object is functioning as an idol is that fear becomes one of the chief characteristics of life. When we set our lives on the idol, we become dependent on it. If our counterfeit God is threatened in any way, our response is complete panic. We do not say, what a shame, how difficult, but rather, this is the end, there's no hope. Another sign of idolatry in our politics is that opponents are not considered to be simply mistaken, but to be evil. The increasing political polarization, bitterness we see in U.S. politics today is seen as a sign we made political activism into a form of religion. And that's true. That's been happening for a while. These can all be, ideologies can be idolatrous if you cling to one of these to fix all the problems in a country, whether it be communism, Marxism, socialism, capitalism, liberalism, conservatism. That can become those can become idolatrous as well, no doubt. You also know you're getting caught up in political idolatry is when you have an election and you always say, America's done, it's over, if so-and-so wins. I've heard that before about every president, just about, and we're still here. I don't know what that means. It's all over. Does that mean like we can't do anything? Does that mean like we can't get up and go to work? What does that mean? I don't know. I know there's struggles, don't get me wrong, but sort of trying to figure out what that means. It's all over. Or you may say if someone wins or loses, or someone wins, maybe this must be the sign Jesus is coming back. Is this Jesus is totally dependent on who wins the next election in the United States, right? Or if you say so-and-so wins, God's bringing judgment to America, as if we know that. Or if we think we get a perfect candidate in office, we don't get the perfect candidate, God can't accomplish what he wants to accomplish. So those are some signs of political idolatry. And obviously this can happen in how we treat people. If we obviously distance ourselves from people who vote differently from us, we break friendship with them, fellowship with them. We don't want a relationship with them. I have seen that happen with Christians over the last election. I saw it. You spend time identifying what you label as liberal or conservative. That's your main identity. Or we vilify anyone who disagrees with your political views. Now, personally for me, I have people all across the political spectrum that are friends of mine that are Christians. I have people on the far left, far right, middle, moderate. I have people all over the place. I try to keep the main thing, which is who Jesus is, preaching the gospel, making disciples, teaching and preaching the commands of Jesus, teaching people how to walk with him. I try to keep that the main thing. Now, I will say that my friends that see things differently than me politically, I don't agree with them. And I simply think that they're wrong. I admit it, and they think I'm wrong. Okay, but I just don't agree with them. And we just have to agree to disagree, because I'm not going to agree. I don't see how they could see something that way. They don't see how I could see something this way. That's just part of politics, right? It's just the way it is. But there's no doubt that identity politics has become an issue, where people have sought a lot of meaning in identity in their political views. As Mark Lilla says here, politics has become a primary form in which we seek meaning. We go to politics, express our identity, and have our identity affirmed. It could be, like I said, they just need a purpose. They don't have anything else, and this is about all they have. They think this is the only answer to everything, is politics. You know, I don't know if you know who this woman is right here, but she oh God, I can't see her face here because I have it blocked out here, or her name. Do I have it on here? Kristen Powers. I'm sorry, Kristen Powers. She was a big news correspondent, but she said here, she said before she became a Christian, she was an atheist. She said that democratic politics had been her religion. She said, my whole life is centered on democratic politics. I was very much in the bubble. I'd worked in the Clinton administration, had so many friends from there. In democratic politics, so it's kind of what we bonded over. It was like what we had, our glue. Now, that can happen in Republican too, don't get me wrong. People can, obviously, their whole life can center on a political party, no matter what it is. But she converted from atheism to Christianity, but she kind of looks back and realizes that was kind of like her God, to be honest. At least she's honest about it. The goal is that hopefully we don't see people primarily through a political lens, that we don't see people as Democrat, Republican, liberal, or conservative. We need to see them as image bearers of God first. They are image bearers of God. You may think they're misled, you may think they're wrong, but we have to realize they're image bearers of God. And it may make you mad sometimes what they say and what they do, but we've got to first see them through the eyes of God. And it's very hard sometimes, I know. And remember finally that, our battle is really a spiritual battle. As Daryl Bach says in his book, Cultural Intelligence, he says, for decades, the church fought a culture war where we often made other people the enemy, but this core biblical text on engagement, he's talking about Ephesians 6, where it talks about the full armor of God and, the spiritual battle there. He says, but this core biblical text on engagement reminds us that a real battle is spiritual. It requires spiritual resources, and we are armed with those in response to the conflict, okay? So we need to remember that people are not the enemy. The battle is really spiritual. It needs to be fought on our knees more than anything. Okay, so it's about all I have for tonight. It's tonight for some things to think about. I know it was a lot to take in, but I will go ahead and